Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I want to talk about Kamala Khan, aka Miss Marvel, and the whole conversation of tech versus Inhuman. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up, because this has been a conversation that's come up, like, obviously it was a whole conversation about how they were going to handle Miss Marvel when they were going to introduce her into the MCU. Obviously, we're getting the TV show Miss Marvel, but obviously in this continuity that is the MCU, there is technically no Inhumans. There's a technicality because Inhumans were actually introduced in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and, well, the show Inhumans, which obviously not everyone liked Inhumans, and also Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. isn't 100% canonical to the MCU. It could be somewhere in the multiverse, but it is not mainline canon. At least it tied in and could, but it was always a conversation of the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. recognized the MCU canon. The MCU canon didn't always pay attention to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And obviously there's like the last two seasons which kind of diverge and in some aspects kind of reconnect to the whole thing. Regardless, tangents and all that aside, the conversation I think has always been an interesting one, because I even brought it up because I'm not well versed in Miss Marvel. The only thing I knew about her is that she is an Inhuman, and so now, because knowing that they are going more tech route with her abilities, which are unaware what her abilities are, it's oversimplifying it, but she's similar to Mr. Fantastic. That's kind of giving you the base understanding of her powers. There's actually more to it, but I'm not fully versed in all that she's capable of. But like the simplest, like straightforward thing is to make the comparison to like Mr. Fantastic, but the difference being is she's an Inhuman. Well, this is the same conversation that came up about Spider-Man, whereas like Spider-Man was introduced in the MCU where mutants don't exist. But Spider-Man's always been able to tote that line because Spider-Man at his core is a mutant, but you know, you could make that a whole story point. Like whenever they do, whatever Spidey's future is, whenever the MCU does eventually introduce X-Men, you could even like retroactively make it go like, oh, you didn't realize it this entire time, Peter, but you've been a mutant the entire time, and now there's other people out here like you. They told that line. And I guess eventually, if they decided to, they could, well, I was like, well, with what they've done with, if they go down the tech route with, Miss Marvel, then it seems super unlikely that they could ever retroactively change. Maybe it's because they might go down the route of not having any Inhumans in the mainline continuity. So Spider-Man could get that trick, because currently he's just labeled as like, oh, a superpowered person. Because I remember having these conversations back before he popped up in Civil War, when news was coming out that he was going to be in Civil War. Then it was like, yo, so like, how are you going to handle the whole, like, there are no mutants in the MCU, so how are you going to handle that? We just label him as like, a superpowered person and just leave it at that. So, but now making it so that Miss Marvel is tech, I think is such a fascinating thing, because I get some people's, like, not necessarily like issue, but just like oh, kind of sad that, you know, that being a part of her story, the struggle, you know, of being an Inhuman, like coming to terms with not just her like identity, you know, just as like, you know, just a teenager as a minority, but also now like as an Inhuman, there's layers upon layers to her circumstances. So if you remove the Inhuman circumstance, it takes away a little bit of her story that is a very important part of her story. So I can see that conversation going on. I just think that's such an interesting thing, because it's like, you know, I'm curious, like, you know, you guys answer me in the comments down below, like, how many people will that bother you? Because maybe a lot of people, like, who would, like, the show will be their first introduction to Miss Marvel, so if you didn't know she was an Inhuman, it might not be that big of a deal. I mean, plus the MCU does its own thing with a lot of stuff, but I feel like this is going to be, I mean, and I could be mistaken, do let me know in the comments down below, but I feel like at least a lot of these characters, at least from what I've heard, are very somewhat true. Obviously there's like departures from like a lot of these characters. Like the one I know most recently people would probably bring up is like Taskmaster, but Taskmaster circumstances are different, but the character at its core is still the same. Like Taskmaster still kind of operates like Taskmaster does in the comics. I know that's like a gray area because it's like semantics in certain regards about like the copying moves, but it was different circumstances, different Taskmaster than what's in the comics. So, but it's like, generally speaking, they typically keep very close to the comics. Yeah, they do their own thing, kind of grounding it in certain regards. But I am curious, like, you know, like I said, because there is no Inhumans, or whether they'll ever, because part of me was wondering is like, do they ever plan on retroactively making, well, not retroactively, but in the future, do they ever plan on shifting her to an Inhuman? Like, will they start it off like, oh, it's 100% tech-based, and then eventually she becomes an Inhuman? Because you also have to think about it too, like the MCU, I mean, well, Inhumans still fall under this category, but like, because I was about to say, the MCU as a whole leans more into the science fictional things, but more specifically, like the more, it's weird to say, but grounded science fiction technology. Like, obviously, it's getting to the point where we're ramping up. Like, obviously, we're throwing into some mysticism. We're going super cosmic in this. But there's, like, some grounded levelness to it in certain regards. Yes, it's weird and crazy. But it's like not that crazy out there science fiction. I know I'm not explaining it well, but you get what I'm trying to say. Like, it's not as wild as science fiction as it could be, even though, yes, it's getting wild. But like I said, I'm not describing it right, because I know, like, mutants and Inhumans both fall under that, like, science fictional category. So that's why I'm like, it makes sense in some lanes in my head of why they would also go down that route. Plus, once again, they haven't introduced Inhumans. Once again, it's like depending on what they decide to do with that, like whether that's like a retroactive thing of like, oh, Inhumans have been hiding amongst us the entire. I mean, to be fair, you can work a way around that. I mean, you know, going by Inhumans, like a lot of Inhumans, not all of them, but a good chunk of like the Royals and stuff like that, and as well as a lot other Inhumans live on the moon, so you can kind of skirt around that if you wanted to. But obviously, it's the same conversation they've had about, like, well, how would they introduce mutants? Like, is it going to be a multiverse thing, or are they just going to build that up from the ground up? Sure, but will it be on a different Earth? Will it be on this Earth? This kind of 616 continuity. It's just an interesting, I think it's just an interesting discussion. I couldn't get that out. I mean, if you ask me personally, I would want them to blend over the Inhumans from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. because I think you could do that. But once again, it's a conversation of, hey, you'd have to basically have people keep up with 7 seasons of a show as canon, but you're also asking people to already be invested in TV shows, but they're not as long running as that. Plus, once again, I talked about it, certain aspects of that show don't fit within the canon, especially in later seasons, but then there's later stuff that kind of retroactively could make it all still fit in the canon. It just depends on whether they want to make it like official 616 canon. It's probably going to be like, oh, this is 313 canon or something like that, you know? So, but they could do that. I just, you know, because there has always been the conversation of like, there are whispers and rumors, nothing official, that they had plans to reboot Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in the MCU. It could be like some of these characters will be played by maybe by the same actors type of thing, but maybe their stories will be changed. And, you know, so that could be one way around it. Like, you know, potentially like what talks have been about Daredevil, like maybe they'll do a similar thing potentially Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and that way you do get Inhumans in that. But like I said, because they are going down a tech route, it doesn't seem like they're going, like I said, not unless that becomes a part of her progression of her story is that she eventually does become an Inhuman, but like, why not start there? But it's like, yeah, that's a complicated thing, because then you have to go like, right, like how much Inhuman stuff was canon, like why haven't we seen the Inhumans until now? I mean, they've been hiding, so that, you know, there's a lot of ground to cover, so I could see why they probably, but I guess the argument could be just wait, but I guess it's like, right, with what they're doing with Monica, what they're doing with Carol, like, you know, going forward, because Kamala's also going to be in The Marvels, that being the Captain Marvel sequel, so I can understand why they want to probably like get a lot of this rolling. I think they have their plans for how things are going to play out. So I'm just curious to see what it's like in the long run. I'm very excited. Like I said, the only bits I know about Ms. Marvel were just like, hey, she's a Inhuman, but then I also know a tiny bit from the Avengers game. I haven't really played it, so like I don't have much to say on that, but from the little bit I saw of it, I like that character, just like her personality and who she is. So I am still curious, because like there was Disney Plus Day, there was like that footage of her like in like a makeshift Captain Marvel suit. I'm also curious like how that whole thing is going to play out, and like why she takes the name Miss Marvel and her correlation to Carol. Like I wonder like how, I'm assuming like it is her origin story, so they'll dive into that, but I'm curious like the way they're going to write around that into like, because I brought it up before, like why is she a big Captain Marvel fan? I mean, because I always chalked it up to her just being a big Captain Marvel fan. Why? Because I think maybe some continuities kind of treat it like that, but maybe there's layers to why she also took up that mantle. But it's like, right, like Carol hasn't been on Earth that long. Like she's constantly like popping around the universe. So I'm like, not unless they had some interaction at like some small point in her life or something. That's what I'm curious like to see how they like correlate those two and put those two characters together. Like I said, obviously this is just stuff kind of running through my head. I'd love to get to know your thoughts in the comments down below. Like I asked earlier, like how do you feel about them going down the more tech route with Miss Marvel rather than making her an Inhuman like she is in the comics? Do you care one way or the other? Like, do you, because I'd also love to know, do you have experience with the character being an Inhuman, so is that why you lean more towards Inhuman? Or are you someone that's just like, no, I want the character to be an Inhuman because Well, for one, like that means we get Inhumans in the MCU, but also just because you're like, right, that's what the character originally was, and it's a big part of her story being like that struggle of being different, like, and just more, you know, in many different layers, like of like her character being different, like you enjoy that, so you'd want that to still be there because you still have her other struggles. That is her character growing up in the States, being a different, you know, ethnicity, you know, so that's always going to already play a role. But having the layer of being an Inhuman already like different, like separates you from the world even more, you know, isolates you to some extent. So I'm you know, I'd love to know your thoughts about everything in the comments down below. Really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.